And on that note, let me get started. My name's Nida. I'm from the SHRM Knowledge and Advisory team. We bring to you this webinar in partnership with Rainmaker, and we're going to be talking about going beyond gender bias, a focus on generation and culture bias. This webinar will be recorded and will be available for viewing later on the SHRM website, www.shrm.org. We have with us today Madhvi Lal, the MD, Head HR India. We have Preeti, Lavanya, Pallavi, Shraddhanjali, and Anthony, an esteemed panel. I'm going to take away the slides so that you can see all of us on screen right here while I introduce all of them. Let me get started. Madhvi Lal, the Managing Director and Head HR India at Deutsche Bank. With 30 years of experience working for large companies like Stanchart and Accenture, Madhvi has now been the head HR at Deutsche Bank since 2015. Diversity and inclusion has been an area that Madhvi has been passionate about. Apart from focusing on driving representation of women across all levels in the organization, she's passionately committed to D&I across all aspects, gender, persons with disability, and the LGBTQI community. Welcome, Madhvi. We look forward to listening more from you. Next, we have Preeti Mello, the Global Head of Diversity and Lead Academy at Tata Consultancy. At TCS, Preeti's mandate and vision is to create a sustainable culture of leadership and diversity. She launched a strategic global initiative of coaching and mentorship via leadership development. And this initiative has been lauded by the Institute of Coaching, Harvard, and has also won the gold from Baden. Another eminent personality with us today is Lavanya Srinagesh, the Corporate Social Responsibility, Diversity, and Inclusion Leader from Genpact. With more than 18 years of work experience across hiring, HR, learning and development domain, as the D&I leader, she's involved in steering initiatives to create a gender-balanced organization with 50% representation of women across all levels. Welcome to the session. I'll move on next to introduce Shraddhanjali Rao, the head HR SAP India and partner to the business, promoter of talent and technology, an HR leader with extensive experience in developing and executing HR strategy for building high-performance organizations across geographies, a trusted partner to key leaders of best-in-class high-tech global companies. Shraddhanjali has co-authored a book describing the what, why, and how of making corporate India a more inclusive place to work. Welcome, Shraddhanjali. And then we have with us Pallavi Shom, the Chief Operating Officer, BNY Mellon Technology India, and Global Head of Strategic Vendor Partnerships. With over 25 years of work experience, Pallavi has extensive cross-functional experience in managing teams across various functions, such as service delivery, communications, relationship management, business enablement, and project and program management. She was recognized with the 2011 President's Award for her contributions to the innovation program at Fidelity as well. Welcome, Pallavi. And I have with us, moderating the conversation today, Anthony Alex, the founder of Rainmaker in 2016 and its Chief Executive Officer. Throughout his career, Anthony has been passionate about training and has conducted numerous workshops on topics ranging from prevention of sexual harassment, anti-corruption practices, corporate governance, code of conduct, and is passionate about learning and training, which is what led him to set up Rainmaker. Let me also then hand it over to Anthony and request him to talk a little about Rainmaker as well before we get into the conversation.
Thank you, Nida. Thank you so much for the introduction. First up, I just want to say that I'm absolutely delighted and privileged to be on this panel. This is truly a very, very power-packed panel, and I'm looking forward to facilitating a really sort of interesting conversation on generation and culture bias. Our topic really is going beyond culture bias, but going beyond gender bias. But I just want to say that gender bias is something that will always be on the table in terms of biases that we have to deal with at the workplace and create awareness and sensitization around them. But today we also want to pick up topics that are sort of haven't probably received that kind of coverage and probably have not had the kind of discussions that they merited. So we'll pick those up. I don't want to take too much time on the Rainmaker introduction. We are a company. We were set up in 2016. We are really a company that helps corporates create ethical workplaces with trainings on both trainings in the form of dramatizations or short films and workshops and so on and so forth. With conversation on ageism, it's something that I think has been talked about in the West, probably a lot more. There are even laws that prohibit age discrimination. And in India, and we don't want to just restrict it to age as a discussion from the perspective of just maybe the older workforce. Our conversation really is what we want to sort of spend a little bit of time today is to understand whether age is a factor that causes the digital divide. By digital divide, we mean the haves and have-nots. There are those who are the haves who are more comfortable in the digital world than those who are probably older and may not be necessarily that comfortable. So is it the nub of the issue? Is it really one of a mental block that older members of the workforce have with respect to technology, or is it merely a perception that folks have sort of some kind of a perception or a bias, but probably not too rooted?
I would say it's a yes or no for me. I think, of course, the recent generations are more tech savvy because they've grown up with technology. And like, if I look at my own generation, the first time we saw television was when I was in the 9th standard, So obviously we've had to sort of evolve very fast. So the answer is yes. To some extent, yes, age can cause a little bit of digital divide. But there are people in the older generations who actually picked up on digital awareness and become digitally savvy. So then the answer is no, it's not a divide in that sense. If there are people open to, making the effort and becoming digitally aware, And I think as we sort of, your topic is really around inclusion, right? So as we focus on inclusion, we must question some of these preconceived notions that we have that, the older generation is not so open or has mind blocks. I think it is a very individual thing. There could be people who would have mind blocks and people who are, ready to pick up and learn and move with time.
That's interesting, Madhuri. So the gap always has existed from time immemorial, right? I mean, I think there was a gap between us and our parents' generation, and now between us and the younger generation. But it's maybe the gap is reducing at some level. Preeti, TCS, one of the largest employers in the country. I mean, you hire so many people day in day out, right? I mean, tens and thousands and lakhs. So how does it work in your organization? I mean, what is the focus? Do you believe that this digital divide exists, or is it more of a perception?
I think it's a mixed reality, and the mixed reality is how do we see it outside or across the world, and how do I see TCS? Let me speak for TCS first. We're a technology company. We have 5 generations. 87% of our population is below 30. So that in itself defines that the divide in it is sort of warped if there was one in the first place. I also do believe that age is, this whole idea of digital divide is about a gap. And the idea about a gap in itself is somewhat of a false idea in the current situation, in the current world that we live in. Because on one level, need in itself precedes desire. On another level, need also erases conditioning. So to Madhvi's point, she and I are potentially the same generation, guessing by, when there was access to technology. And we didn't grow up with it. We didn't have cell phones. We had dial phones and so on and so forth.
Yes.
It doesn't matter, because I think we have the advantage of seeing an entire spectrum of change. But at the same time, it is learned over time. The current generation, technology is intuitive to them.
Correct.
And their response to technology is different. As an organization that is focused on using technology as a medium, we are clearly, we address the divide if we ever were to show up, but I really have not seen any of it.
At Genpact as well?
Absolutely. The average age at Genpact would be roughly between 29 to 30, at the very maximum. But, in today's day and age, I don't know whether you have a choice to have a digital divide. I think maybe 5 years or 10 years ago, there was a choice where there was a generation that understood it and there was a generation that didn't understand it. But I think in today's day and age, there is no choice. If you want to buy your groceries or you want to order your daily supplies or whatever it is, right? Technology is leading the way. And as you think of the future of work, if you don't get in line with technology, you are going to be completely left behind. So never mind what organizations are saying, as people who are part of the workforce, you don't have a choice but to embrace digitization, where earlier on you could work your way around certain things. Today it's becoming almost, thanks to the pandemic, I think we've advanced 10 years faster than we had initially thought we would. And as a result, it's not a choice. So therefore, I don't think that a divide from a digitization standpoint fundamentally exists in the way it perhaps did years ago. And from a Genpact standpoint, I mean, we are a technology-enabled company, so not getting onto the digital bandwagon is definitely not a choice, at least in our ecosystem. But I will say this, right? If you remove it away from hardcore, tech as a function or digitization as a function, and you look at your day-to-day offerings, whether it be HR, whether it be sales, whether it be services, so on and so forth, I think the positivity that tech has brought to collaboration across the globe. I mean, we are 100,000 employees across some 38 countries. The possibilities of collaboration, peer-to-peer working, working across regions, locations, etc. I think it's just brought in a whole new landscape in which people can really bring in diversity and inclusion to a specific project or a function. So that's one aspect of it. I think even when you look at it from a learning and development standpoint, you're looking at access, right? You're not restricted by boundaries anymore, or even states. If you look at it from an India perspective as well, you're not restricted by boundaries when you think of learning and development, or when you think of HR, or when you think of sales. I think the shift has been almost like 360 degrees, where we're operating in a completely different universe to where we wanted to, where we originally were operating from. But I think there are so many positivities.
Your thoughts, SAP, and what's the experience in your organization?
Just building on what everybody said, being a digital immigrant versus a native digital native will have its pros and cons, right? The way we may want to look at digital immigrants is from a point of view of three categories, and that's probably what's researched, right? The avoiders who stick to the traditional mediums, don't take on something new. You have the reluctant adopters, right? So who are very aware of it, but taking their call a bit more slower. And then you have the eager adopters, and I really like the mothers taking over to Skype has been a need for us to connect. So I think you have the eager adopters. Now, obviously, representing a product organization, you can imagine, for a tech company, digital savvy puts food on our table. So like many of them said, most of our employees fall in this category. For the 15,000 people that we have in this country, my average age in core development versus consulting versus sales will be different. And if I average it out, yes, it will be around the same thing that Lavanya spoke about, at 29, 30. But the context to understand is who's bringing what, and as an organization, what are you doing cognizantly to acknowledge and stop this? So I'll give you an example and maybe more specifics, right? You of course have digital natives who take on to tech like a duck to a pond with great rigor. They come up with fantastic ideas, but the digital immigrants have the advantage of experience with them. And we've put some structural interventions in place which allow the two sides to not just talk to each other, but see the benefit of each other. And I'll also give you a few examples. Like, we run an annual hackathon. It's a very popular one across all our employee bases in the country. We make sure that the team composition is by design mixed.
Okay. Of all age categories, across age categories.
So we make it, because what happens is a group of youngsters will just get together, will have great ideas, but people who've had experience will bring in a customer perspective, right? Or a more mature perspective. So sometimes making sure your platforms and your processes acknowledge what each group brings is very core to what you will deliver as an experience.
Your organization has done, what SAP has done in terms of really trying to blend the, I guess, the age groups to try and see, get the best out of what each can offer. And I think that's really the ideal way to do it. Pallavi, BNY Mellon, has that experience been similar in your organization as well?
Yeah, so the good thing about coming last is that everybody else has said what exactly is happening with us, right? So, and it was wonderful to hear everybody's perspective. So to your question, right, the whole digital divide, I think if you look up the term itself, it's like the tendency for older adults to less use, things like the internet or any applications, etc., and as much as the younger adults who do access it, right? And I would think that this kind of adoption of technology certainly, varies by age, education levels, income levels, access to technology as well is a big thing. So it's not necessary that a younger population would have access to everything, because there are a lot of other demographics that impact all of this, right? And it's important to understand that specifically in the context of our country, as we have all of those demographics. But I think one thing that COVID-19 has taught us, if anything, is that, this access to technology and a baseline of having these digital skills are absolute necessities. Even if there are people who did not have access to it, are somehow managing to do it, right? And I see, folks that work, domestic help that works, at my place, right? Their kids studying on these little smartphone and trying to get into Zoom classes on schools. Like it's just about what is a necessity, and necessity is the mother of invention. Stand by that. If it's the ambience, it's the necessity, and it's like just what is it that each generation brings to the workforce. I think that's really important. And even when I was much younger and I was first learning how to use a computer, even, right? Even at that time, there was a lot of change management, there was awareness built, training given, exposure provided. And it's not that the assumption should be that the younger generation know all the technology. They don't. They need a lot of those interventions to learn. You might know just C++ or Java, but the need might be AngularJS, or you may need to, learn safe and agile practices. That opportunity that is required and that the company or an organization needs to provide, I think that's what BNY Mellon is trying to provide, and ensuring that, everybody has that equal opportunity across age or gender.
So is there an intergenerational divide between between Gen Z, the digital natives, as they're called, and the older workforce? So just on the same theme, really, do organizations see stress or conflict between these generations on account of technology, on account of familiarity with technology, and of course in organizations where 85 to 90% of the workforce are, let's say, 30%, that stress is likely to be less. But is this something that organizations are consciously saying, okay, we need to look at this aspect, or is this something that people are saying it doesn't exist and it's not an issue, at least in my organization?
No, I think that's a great question. So I think it's easy to assume that digital excludes older generations. I think a true digital workplace really enables all of its employees to communicate across different channels, however they prefer. And when it comes to dealing with employees of multiple generation, I think it's really important that we provide, and like I said previously, right, that the organization provides the tools that are needed to either learn or communicate in different manners depending on the preference. And I think technology can be that great bridge that instead of dividing, you actually bring all of that content to a centralized place.
The whole reverse mentoring concept, absolutely fascinating. And I think if more and more organizations were to adopt that, definitely we'd see a sort of a change in this. Shraddha, SAP, and do you have sort of, is this something that you're conscious of the intergenerational conflict, if at all, if it exists? And is this something that you believe needs to be a focus area for the organization? Or, like Pallavi said, digital, it doesn't matter. Whoever adopts and is comfortable with it, it works, irrespective of factors like age or anything else. Shraddha, you're on mute.
Being aware of the biases was an important step for us, and we've been in this journey. The generational diversity has been an active area of work for us for 8 years, at least 8 years, right? What have we learned in that exercise? And I'll share a little bit with you. I think there are biases, but they're not usually intentional, but they do impact team dynamics. I think as much as we can talk about, and we don't have to just view it from the digital lens, it could be from where you're coming from, what your value systems are, how you look at collaboration, how you look at authority, how do you look at communication. And that is different across different generations. Let's be very honest about it. I think I type faster, but my nieces type even faster than me, right? So they're very basic things that we have to acknowledge. I think what would be important to note is, again, specifics of what we've done about it. Pallavi talked about cross-generational mentorship. We have a very successful program that runs on cross-generational mentorship. And, we've been running it for a while. First 2 years, it worked fine. Then we realized, just by putting some, two people from very different generations together, yes, there is an outcome, but how do I make them succeed for each other? We put in a program, it's called the cross-generational mentorship for social media buddies. So we got the Gen Zs or millennials to be mentors for vice presidents and above, specifically on the topic of social media. You will not believe what that did, because we gave them a construct to work upon. They were so happy because this is something that came naturally to them. They created value for their mentors. And that relationship really thrived, rather than just doing, basic cross-generational mentorship. So that's one example I can share with you. There was another thing that we really like doing.
As you look at diversity and inclusion, and whether you look at it in terms of generation divide or gender or LGBTQ, whatever kind of diversity we might be addressing at that point in time, there are some fundamental actions and steps that all organizations take. So whether it is on the education side, where you look at managing unconscious bias workshops, or whether it is managing the behavior and the culture within the organization, whether it is looking at experiential learning so that it's moving out of the academic into the visual, and you can take a step back and say, oh, I do that. Because to Shraddha's point, most people, in most cases, it's not intentional. And sometimes it can come from the best place ever, but can have the completely polar opposite reaction as far as the other individual is concerned. What I think we do need to look at, and this is looking at it futuristically, is if you ask a millennial or a Gen Z or a Gen Y, the fact that we even call them all of these names is something that they find fundamentally offensive. What are we really talking about when we're looking at the divide? Is a behavioral mannerism, for lack of a better word, that's different from the way we behave, right? So we follow a certain set protocol. We've been brought up with certain, to quote my sister, we know when to get back into our box and stay there versus constantly pushing it open. And that is the fundamental difference between this generation and that, is that they won't take a step back. If they have something to say, they treat you with equality and equity, and will not give you that, okay, you're right, just because you're 10 years older than me or 15 years older than me, or because you're a vice president or a senior vice president, which is why programs like reverse mentoring work so well, because this group will tell someone in truth that this is what's working and this is what's not working. So if we truly want to harness this workforce, I think that's the break that we have to go through, which is to recognize that experience doesn't necessarily mean lack of experience doesn't necessarily mean lack of ability, and neither does it mean lack of futuristic thinking. I mean, I think Mark Zuckerberg's a great example of futuristic thinking. He was in college when he created Facebook, right? I don't think they see bias the way we see it. They don't see the gender, they don't see the color, they don't see the age, they don't see all of this. They're far more, they brought up with the eyes of greater equality than perhaps we
That is
were.
true.
So that is another, I think it's those nuances that kick in.
No, absolutely. Well said, Lavanya. Preeti, with with 80% workforce below 30. How is TCS handling it? Is this something that you're mindful or conscious of, or it's not even an issue within your organization?
Well, we're most certainly aware of it, and I think it's one of the uh, areas of our attention. And I'll build on what Pallavi, Lavanya, and Shraddha have said, rather than, because we're really doing the same thing. All of us are really working in the same direction. Uh, to Lavanya's point, that the context and the conditioning of across time is different for all of us, which is what we call, oh, we're culturally different, or there's a generational difference. It's just we grew up in different times with different contexts altogether. Uh, the challenge is not necessarily about who's using technology or not. That's a need. We'll all get there one way or the other. The challenge is, are we really ready to accept each other as we are? And most certainly, the younger generation comes with an understanding that they are more embracing of the other than potentially my generation has been. Our expertise somewhere lay in judging the other or being able to define who the other is. And we've been busted. The fact of the matter is that nobody really cares about it. In fact, we are now learning over time to be better listeners, to give up judgment, to have more coach like abilities, and so on and so forth. These young ones come with it. And they come with it with a great force. They also have great clarity. They're not ready to negotiate on who they are. We've negotiated a great deal. My generation most certainly has. We've adapted as women leaders, we adapted and learned skills and abilities that were expected of us. I see young women leaders today who will show up as they are. So
Right.
at TCS, we've got a new affinity group called Bridge. And the whole idea is establishing relationships across diverse generations. And the conversation is entirely around reverse mentorship.
I just had a campus presentation yesterday, and I was talking to a bunch of students who were just starting their MBA. And I had 3 questions that came on work-life balance. And I was thinking, in my time, nobody spoke about work-life balance. And we also have, employees coming in, some of the new joiners who come in and they ask, but why should I wear a tie? I'm in this field. Why do I need to wear a tie to work? So some of those questions are being asked and challenges are being raised to the way we used to never ask those questions, right? So it is kind of, I think, something that we have to accept. And I think from our perspective, the digital divide is possibly the understanding of the possibilities of technology, and I think the digital interventions that can be impacted. So for us, that is a need really to see that the older generations may know a little bit about the technology thing, but the newer generation knows much more, and what we also have reverse mentoring, and like Shraddha, we have a very focused reverse mentoring. There are areas identified which the mentor, the millennial who's coming into the workforce says, I have these expert areas or whatever, and the mentees, who are the senior leaders, will say, this is what I want to learn, and we try and match those and pair up people. So I've actually had the good fortune of being mentored 2 years in a row by people who come in fresh into the organization, and it's been really a huge learning for me. One, of course, was to understand the possibilities of technology. What are the new fields that I should learn or at least familiarize myself with? The second was to understand a little bit about what motivates them, and there's some very interesting insights into what motivates them as employees, as people, what do they like at work, etc. So that's something that I think really worked for us. We also had the unconscious bias training, which is on for some time, but it's just not doing that workshop. It is about making sure that once the awareness is there, drawing up plans to say, okay, this is my unconscious bias, and how do these manifest at work, and what do I do to manage these biases, really?
Part 1 of our question, and we'll pick up both parts. So whenever each of our panelists gets the question, if you could address both parts in your response, then that will be comprehensive. Part A, do people living in metros have a bias against people from small towns and vice versa? We've heard this a lot of people, especially, I think the bias kind of works from a small town perspective. The person who's coming from a small town feels that there is a bias against them, and often that is a tussle that takes place in an organization where the newbies might be from a smaller towns. So that's one. And Nida, if you could move to the next slide. The second part is a natural corollary to that, which is what organizational checks do you have to avoid such biases coming into play at a recruitment level, and particularly since all of you represent organizations that recruit in such large numbers. Is there a kind of a system or a organizational check in place to avoid these kind of biases?
Question and perspective, Anthony, and I think obviously we all have our unconscious biases and conscious biases depending on the environment we've grown up, in and the experiences we've had. I personally don't think that we have seen this type of affinity bias in the workplace in the last 5 years. So if I look at my early career, which was I think probably 10 years ago, we used to get grievances like this, where people would say that, I'm being treated differently because I'm from this part of the state, or the rest of the team is from this state or this community and I'm treated differently. I haven't seen that those kind of grievances coming up in the last 5 years. And I think it's possibly because of the various initiatives that organizations have put in place, that probably don't even if there's an affinity that people have outside workplace, it doesn't manifest in the workplace. So I would say I haven't really seen that.
So Madhu, what you're saying really is that it may have existed maybe 10 years ago at the workplace, and may have also manifested itself quite sort of in an in-your-face manner. But what you're seeing is that over the last 5 or odd years,
5 years, yeah,
that's pretty much gone, which means it goes to what we were saying about the younger generation, I guess, the Gen Zs, that they are beyond all of these kind of biases that may have existed previously. Preeti, your take on this, especially from a TCS perspective, because the workforce is large, you're scattered all over. So is this something that you've seen, and also from a recruitment perspective?
Well, I've most certainly,
please.
I've most certainly seen it. I don't think it's an issue. I can't deny that bias does exist, but bias doesn't exist to say, are people living in metros biased about people in small towns? I think it's both ways. People living in small towns are biased about people living in metros. Biases are rampant in our human behavior, and it's only over time and with awareness and with a lot of inner work do we actually come to a place of exposing some of those biases. Now, how does it show up is my sense is, and my belief is, that any community of people that is lesser in number will feel marginalized, and there will be a tendency to then form a group and say, oh, they are like that and we are like that. It's very, very natural. I've not, in all my time at TCS for about 7-8 years that I've been here, I've not had a single issue where somebody's complained or come up with a problem around this. I do believe that meritocracy has overtaken all biases and actually shushed us and said, you know what, all that conditioning that might have existed in societal frameworks has gone for a 6. And so I'm so glad it has. There's a lot of focus on who can do the job, how well they can do it. And over time, my belief is that some of the current and existing biases will also disappear. For instance, around gender, which is a very big one. I think that's possibly the deepest bias that exists within all workforces across the world.
I think as human beings, we are fundamentally a fairly selfish species, and we're focused on what it is that works for us and is successful at the end of the day, right? And if you look at the pace of work and the way work has been defined over the last 5 to 7 years, it's become very task oriented and output result oriented. So when you have a task output result oriented culture and ecosystem, then you want people who are going to get you there the fastest. So to Madhavi's point again, you start looking for the skill, you start looking for the aptitude, you start looking for the fitment in terms of behavioral traits. I mean, I'll tell you at Genpact, one of our biggest focuses has been, organizational culture, in which we look at agility, curiosity, and speed to outcome as one of the, key traits that's expected of all employees amongst others. So there are two or three things that propel you forward, and there are two or three things that hold you back. Your ability to pivot and change with the times. I don't think any of us have seen the kind, I mean, we have seen unprecedented requirements of agility and openness to change as we have in the last 2 to 3 years, right? I mean, it has been at a different quantum altogether.
One thing you have to be cognizant between metro and non-metro is how the person comes across at the stage of recruitment, because inside you've taken care, within the organization you've taken care of things, right? And maybe I want to highlight a few things. Being a tech company and the one that operates a product in the HR space as well, we have a sentiment analysis for job descriptions, and it's outstanding. Anthony, I cannot tell you, you put in a job description, it tells you automatically words which are gender favoring, where are generational favoring, and also if there are other nuances, right? The cultural nuances, and people will apply or not apply. We've just by the usage of that, we've seen an increased talent pool across breadth, and now we've been living with this for 3 years. So definitely that's a big one for us. We do the resume matcher. The SAP has its own tool for resume matching. So the minute you use an AI and an ML algorithm, which is purely picking and playing on skills and not on a recruiter as well, who has an affinity from where that person's come from, you're eliminating that. You're doing blind screen hiring, right? We've actually done blind screen hiring in black rooms as well. And it's an outstanding. The video is available publicly. You should see the experience of the interviewers and the interviewees, and it was cross gender, cross generations. It's so liberating. So I think the bias does not exist in, at least within the organizations. We've nullified, and technology has been a big lever.
How do we at BNY Mellon just also take care of that piece, apart from all the other things that everybody said, is that we have always on listening tools. So we have employee engagement surveys that are weekly, not annually or semi-annually like most companies have. So there's always feedback which is getting gathered on what's the mood of the organization, and all those questions every week keep getting changes and are contextual to anything that's happening. And it's of course been a godsend, specifically over the last couple of years. Upward feedback is something that we take very seriously, right? Managerial upward feedback. And again, seeing trends in that, right? It's not that it's just one person who probably has a grievance against their manager for anything, but it's a trend across different teams and how that person is performing as they are moving on and managing different teams. So we actually have a very strong inclusive hiring training programs. Specifically, if you look at, and I can talk, say, on the tech side, the hiring managers, it's not just the hiring managers who are taking interviews. We have cross-functional interviews and what we call bar raiser interviews. Now, bar raisers are people that are specifically handpicked individuals who have demonstrated, upholding the BNY Mellon values and behaviors that are associated with those particular values, right? And strength in diversity is one of the values of our organization. So that's one piece that I wanted to talk on, the affinity bias. The other one, in the big city, small town, again, like I mentioned about the pandemic, I think it's been a great equalizer. It's brought us down to be very clear about what the person is doing, how they are doing it, rather than where they are doing it from, right? So what happens is that you could be, and a lot of our folks have also, like others were saying, people have moved out. We are providing a lot more flexibility. Even when we come back, as we look at our future of work, it's all going to be hybrid, and we will provide a lot of flexibility, specifically on the tech side, right? So that whole divide of whether somebody was in a bigger city where our offices are, but have moved to their hometowns, to their parents, or just because that's where they grew up, etc., that flexibility will always be there. So that whole equalization has happened.
There is so much intelligence that sits in these everyday things that happen within an organization. I think there's great merit to the question. And it's important to understand that all of what we've spoken of is very measurable. To Lavanya's point, through data, to Shraddha's point, through innovation, and also through culture that can be measured and reported through various studies and matrices.
Wonderful. I think, Nida, we've sort of, I think we have really got some very, very diverse
insights, yeah.
perspectives. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you, SHRM, for hosting. I've really had a wonderful session today, speaking with all of you. So thank you all for making time today from your schedules. Nida, over to you.
Thank you so much, everyone, and wishing everyone a great day ahead. And to our audience, the recording will be available. To the SHRM certified folks, you can go ahead and get 1 recertification credit for attending this webinar as well. Thank you so much, all of you, for being such amazing panelists.